Hume, we saw these things. Now, what Hume does is he challenges the whole notion of causation, and also connected with that is the idea of the reliability of what is called inductive reasoning. An inductive argument, I mean, the easiest way of talking about an inductive argument is that you form a general conclusion based on past particular observations. Now, inductive reasoning does not always go from particulars to generals. You can provide counterexamples where inductive reasoning goes from particulars to particulars or generals to particulars. But basically, in an inductive argument, we're trying to go from all observed A's are B's to all A's are B's. In other words, so that we can formulate some kind of a universal law of nature. And I mean, you can say, well, look, all observed cases of water boiling at sea level have water boiling at 100 degrees centigrade or 212 Fahrenheit. Therefore, in the future, we can predict that, at sea level pressure, because pressure affects things, right? Have you ever looked at, some things like packages of rice have separate directions if you happen to live in a place like Denver where you're a mile above, the cooking directions are different because things behave differently. But if you're talking about sea level pressure, water supposedly always boils at 212 degrees. So there's a universal law of nature. But the point of induction, though, that Hume challenges is you're always going beyond what is strictly observed, because we haven't observed every case of water boiling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, a deductive argument is absolutely necessary. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to do. You would say all water boils, at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. This is water that is to be heated to 212. Therefore, this water will boil then. Now, this is a deductive argument, and in other words, if this statement is true, that all cases of water that every time water is heated to 212 at sea level pressure, it's going to boil. And this is a case of water, then we can predict. So we can form a prediction, that it's going to boil. But if these two statements are true, this has to be true. That's a deductive argument. But induction goes the other way often. You know, in other words, from observed particular cases, we're trying to formulate a general law. And what Hume points out is, you know, there basically is a logical gap here between all observed cases where water is heated to 212 degrees, it's boiled at sea level, to, you know, what seems to be a natural law. All cases are that way. And so Hume wants to do two things. He wants to challenge inductive reasoning, and he also wants to question the claim that we know what cause and effect is, and that the cause and effect relationship enables us to formulate general scientific laws. So, you know, I mean, this basically has what I put. So in an inductive argument, in a probabilistic argument, then we're going beyond what is strictly observed. And so we're going beyond what empiricism should justify, right? In other words, from observed particular cases of water boiling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, we're making a general assertion that it always happens this way, and Hume says you're not justified by strict empiricist guidelines to make that general observation. So, now, this was an example from a textbook I used. Frankly, I'm not real crazy about the example. It's in the slide because the text used it. But, you know, in other words, you have a researcher out there in the field studying loggerhead turtles, and, you know, they've been doing this for 20 years, and they've said, well, these turtles lay eggs every 2 years. So they're making the leap from all observed cases of loggerhead turtles that we've studied have laid their eggs every 2 years. So we can formulate a general scientific law that all loggerhead turtles lay eggs every 2 years. But notice the conclusion is stronger than the evidence. And it's this that Hume wants to challenge. And so basically, what he tries to say is the logical leap is unjustified. Now, there's one of his discussions is with billiard balls, and you saw that in the video. First of all, Hume challenges the empiricist claim that we can get at a general law of nature, like, you know, that when one billiard ball rolls into the other, it's going to send off the other in a predictable direction. In other words, rationalists like Descartes would say, well, we have that knowledge rationally, not based on observation. And one of Hume's famous quotes is, we tend to think that if we were zapped into this world without any prior experience, and we looked at the billiard balls on a billiard table, that just by our reason, without ever having seen what happens on the top of a billiard table, we could predict what's going to happen. And in other words, Hume is characterizing the rationalists this way, that we can, by pure reason, understand and know the truth of a general law, like when the cue ball hits the 8 ball at a particular angle, it's going to send it off, or at a particular point, it's going to send it off. But think about Hume's point. If you were just zapped into the world and had never seen what occurs on top of a billiard table, would you really be able to predict it? Well, and in other words, if we say, well, okay, we shoot an object ball, or a cue ball. This is your cue ball into an object ball, right? And every time it hits it in a particular way, it's going to send it off at a predictable angle. Obviously, anyone who knows a lot about pool knows this. That you can count on, if the pocket's here, you know where to hit it to send it into the pocket, because you think nature is uniform enough and the laws of nature are uniform enough that every time you hit, the object ball, like an 8 ball, with the cue ball at a particular angle, you can predict the result, right? But if you've never seen what happened, could you predict what's going to happen? What do you think? What do you think about Hume's point here? Suppose you're zapped into the world. Think you could predict it rationally? Or, well, this point, whether you agree with him or not, this point, of course, is a point that Hume's trying to make against the rationalists. What do you think, Ashley? You were. Yeah. I could tell I could see the wheels turning.
You have no basis for it, so you have no reference point.
Pardon?
You have no reference point for your option. So how are you supposed to relate it to
Mm-hmm. And is this the only conceivable option? Well, not really. In other words, we could imagine, and this was Hume's point, and maybe some of you picked it up from the video, there are several different outcomes we could imagine, right? Maybe it just stops when it hits this. Maybe it sends it somewhere and the thing comes back, like it's on a string. Maybe it breaks us apart. In other words, there are a lot of different options here that Hume says are conceivable. And what is his point? Suppose we had, 5 different options for what happens when we hit it. And this is the option that we know really does happen from experience. What Hume is saying is, before experience, all these are live options in our mind if we'd never seen what happens. And so, by our reason alone, Hume says we can't zero in on any one of these and justify it as the reason. So Hume, disagrees with rationalists like Descartes that somehow via pure reason, we could tell what happens on top of a billiard table. So Hume says if we can have any knowledge of what happens, it's going to be based on actual observations after the fact. But now here's where Hume again brings in the fact that, I mean, suppose we had, suppose you're an expert at hitting it in a particular way, and you can send the object ball into the pocket by hitting in a particular way. Maybe if you put them on the spots, so they're always in the same place, you can send it into the pocket, let's say, every time you've done it. Well, okay, so those are past observations. Every time I've hit the object ball with the cue ball at a particular place, I've been able to send it into the pocket in the past. So I can say, well, therefore, based on these observations, on what I've actually seen happens on top of a billiard table, I can predict that every time, I hit the cue ball, or rather the object ball, like an 8 ball with the cue ball, it's going to go into the pocket if I hit it in exactly the same way. Now, it's this inference that Hume is now going to challenge, and now his opponents are not the rationalists, but the empiricists. So Hume says, well, what makes you think you can predict the future based on the past? Now, one point you might bring in is, wait a second, nature's uniform. The pools on a billiard table are part of nature. Nature runs by fixed universal laws. So by assuming that nature is uniform, I know that when the cue ball hits the object ball at exactly that place, it's always going to send it off in the right area. But Hume says, wait a second. What makes you think that nature's uniform? And you say, well, I know that nature's uniform based on past experience, and using inductive reasoning, I can, in other words, from what I've seen in the past, I can predict that it's always going to happen in the future and that nature's uniform. So with the, given the premise that I hit the object ball with the cue ball in a particular way, it's always going to do what it did in the past because I'm bringing in the assumption that nature is uniform. And that's what guarantees that I can predict the future from the past, that I can predict that if I hit it in the right way, it's always going to go in the pocket. But Hume says, wait a second, your belief that nature is uniform, your justification for the belief that nature is uniform was inductive reasoning. Your claim that nature is uniform is based on past observations, but he said, wait a second, what we're challenging right now is the legitimacy of that kind of inductive reasoning. So Hume says, you've got a circular argument, you're presupposing what you're supposed to be proving, In other words, if you try to bring in the assumption that nature's uniform, how are you going to justify that claim except but by inductive reasoning from experience about how nature has behaved in the past? But Hume says, what I'm challenging as a skeptic now is that kind of reasoning on which you think you can base claims about the future from what went on in the past. So you can't bring in the principle of the uniformity of nature because you needed inductive reasoning to justify it, and Hume says I'm challenging the validity of inductive reasoning. Now, another way of saying this is if we define cause and effect, and see, pool balls are a really good illustration of this. If we define cause and effect, we say, well, one of the things that makes us think we can predict the effect from the cause, can predict that it's going to roll off into the pocket if we hit it right, is that there's a necessary connection between cause and effect, right? I'm convinced in the morning that when I go down and make coffee, that when I put the tea kettle above the gas stove, that the water is going to eventually heat up hot enough, you know. That necessarily that's going to happen if I put a kettle of water over a flame. So you say that there's a necessary connection between cause and effect. But here again, Hume says we're not going to come at knowledge of that necessary connection based on a priori reasoning apart from experience, like the rationalists thought we could. Hume rejects that. So he says, if we think there's a necessary connection between a cause and its effect, then our philosophical justification that that necessary connection exists should come from observation. But Hume says, if we examine the notion of cause and effect, what do we actually see? Well, he says that the cause precedes the effect in time, right? And that the cause is contiguous to the effect. In other words, the two pool balls actually have to touch one another, right? If, you know, all of us have probably made a bad pool shot where we miscued, you know, maybe you didn't put enough chalk on your cue, and the cue ball goes rolling past the ball you were shooting at. It didn't do anything to move the ball, did it? Because it didn't contact it. So Hume says, what do you actually observe in the relation of cause and effect? Well, he says resemblance and contiguity, or he says that the cause precedes the effect in time, right? The cue ball's got to roll into the 8-ball to send it off, and contiguity. But he says, what do you not see? What Hume says is, what our senses can't give us is information about a necessary connection between cause and effect. And so basically what he says is, if, yeah, and I know we got to go. If the necessary connection were there, then you could conclude that the effect is going to follow from the cause because there's a necessary connection between cause and effect. But Hume says that's the one thing that experience does not give us. And so experience won't enable you to justify, that the future will always resemble the past, and that causes will, the same cause will always produce a predictable effect. Now, is Hume going to jump out a second floor window saying, well, maybe causation is not going to work this time like it did in the past? No. But he is going to say that philosophically we can't justify it. So this is Hume's famous criticism of inductive reasoning and about whether we can make future predictions, and also talk about there being universal laws of nature. And, so this little piece of skepticism goes well beyond pool balls on a pool table, but it's, can science formulate and justify philosophically any universal scientific rules? And Hume says, hey, if I'm going to be a strict empiricist, I got to be skeptical about that. You can formulate them, and they work in a practical sense, but he says you don't have an absolute philosophical justification for them. Okay, look, have a great weekend. Work on your talk if you don't already have it. If you came in after I called the roll, let me know you're here. And we'll see you Tuesday, and we'll try to fit in. We're going to keep going on the talks till there ain't no more, basically, Tuesday. All right. Yeah.
Whatever. I just wanted to see, you said
okay.
you would tell us what we got.
Yeah, and I thought you did a pretty good job. You're
Brad.
Brad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, I can't take it though, right? I just look at it and
Right.
Oh, okay.
Just because I haven't recorded
yeah.
it yet. But yeah, very good expression, very good delivery,
Thank you.
well paced and good shit.
I emailed you my paper.
Yes, and I
I
just
did it
saw the
right
email
before our
today.
class.
I've been out of town. I
Okay.
was out of town most of yesterday.
Okay.
Not just out of town, out of state.
Okay.
But yeah. So I'm going to
Okay.
download
I just
that
want to make sure you got it. I'm
after
not
the
worried
class.
about it.
I saw it in the email
Okay.
right before class.
Okay, perfect. And should I
So
just
it's there.
have everything prepared to do a talk on Tuesday? And if
Yeah,
bring it in?
I would say,
Okay.
yeah, right. Because I know you missed the day you
Yeah,
originally
I
signed up.
missed a few
But
days.
I'm being kind of,
Thank you.
I mean, we're not giving people zeros because I missed the day.
Alright.
I mean, so yeah. I don't. There's going to be somebody who we're going to squeeze in Thursday,
Okay.
even though I don't want to. But try to do it
Come
Tuesday,
Thursday.
because
Okay.
I'm going to try to go on these things.
Okay.
As I said, till there ain't no more on
Okay,
Tuesday.
perfect.
So that we